North Korea returns to its old games. China tells its citizens to behave. I compare Korea and Japan, and we find out what exactly is a career break. All this and more. The QiRanger Podcast starts now. Greetings and salutations, my excellent friends. I hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Steve Miller, the Internet's QiRanger, and this is the QiRanger Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Now, before we get into the show, there are a few announcements I want to make. First up, unfortunately, this will be the final podcast for the month of October. Since Joe and I are traveling so much to film episodes for I won't have time to sit down again to record a full podcast until November. Also, with the conclusion of Video Rodeo, there's now a hole in my programming schedule on Wednesdays. So I've taken the opportunity to fill that with QiRanger's Walk and Talk. It's a, let's say 20 to 60 minute program of me exploring Korea in an unedited version. So essentially I go to a location, I start the camera, I walk and I explore, and I share with you my thoughts as they occur in real time. So if you want to see more of Korea, see it as it happens, this is the show for you. So you can start looking for that this week on Wednesdays. Well, all that being said, let's get started with the news. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. As we do every week, let's get started with the top stories from the Koreas. North Korea will never back away from nuclear arms. North Korea once more criticized the South Korean government, calling on President Park Geun-hye by name, stating that Seoul's continued efforts to work with regional powers to control it is doomed for failure. Now, this should come as no surprise to anyone. North Korea has been saying for a long time that it views the world as a threat, and it feels that it's always going to be on the end of an imminent attack. So it feels obligated to pursue nuclear weapons programs. Now, even though China, Russia, Japan, South Korea, and the United States have been trying to curtail this, they've been largely ineffective. In fact, they've been ineffective because North Korea is continuing to develop programs. The reactor has restarted, we anticipate a new missile launch, and it probably won't be too long before we have another atomic test. So, with North Korea's bold statement that they will never, ever give up this program, the ball is squarely in the other 5 countries' court. To date, these 5 countries have not found a way to entice North Korea to stop the program. As long as North Korea feels that it is threatened, as long as they can continue developing this nuclear program and still get aid and still receive international transactions through other trade routes, they aren't going to stop. The onus is on the group of 5 countries to find a way that will make dropping the nuclear program beneficial for North Korea. They haven't been able to do it so far, and until they do, North Korea is going to continue its program. North Korea is trying to stir up trouble once again. With joint military drills starting off the coast of South Korea, North Korea released a statement saying that they find these drills threatening and that they're poised to make a preemptive strike. Now, thankfully, the media has not gone overboard as they did in the spring reporting this story, and tensions have pretty much remained, as they always have, fairly calm. However, there are a few things to make note of with this story. Number one, responsible reporting on all sides is always greatly appreciated. One of the things I took issue with earlier this year was just the way that foreign media was really blowing things out of proportion. They're doing things right now. They get the statement from North Korea, they report it. South Korea says that they evaluate the threat and make changes that are necessary, and that they don't see any troop movements, and that should something happen, they will retaliate in force. And then the story's dropped. And that's the way things really should be, because North Korea has a pattern of every time there is a joint drill of issuing these statements. So it's really nothing new. These statements come out all the time. But the one thing to keep in mind is that If North Korea continues to issue these statements every time that there's a joint drill, that they feel threatened, that they are going to attack South Korea, eventually there's a danger of South Korea and its allies becoming too complacent, that they will let their guard drop. There's also a danger that continuously issuing these statements will weaken Kim Jong-un and the military's position, the upper military position in North Korea, and there could be an internal power struggle. So right now there's nothing to be concerned about, but it will be interesting to see how North Korea moves forward with Japan, South Korea, and the United States bringing more military power into the Asia theater. It will be really interesting to see how North Korea responds to that. Will they actually instigate a small skirmish with South Korea just to prove that they have bite in their bark? South Korea's suicide rate falls for the first time in 6 years. While South Korea continues to have the dubious title of the country with the most suicides in the world, it does appear that Seoul's efforts to curb suicide is having a positive effect. In a recent study published, the 2000 rate for suicides was 23.8 per 100,000 people, and that's down from the 2011 rate of 26.9 people per 100,000. Now, these new efforts include raising awareness, offering more hotlines, and promoting counseling services. It's unclear as to whether or not these are actually having the positive effect, but in a country where there are so many suicides, and I personally have had students that have had close friends commit suicides, any drop in the number is welcome. Moving on to East Asian news, the United States supports Japan in expanding military action. South Korea and China continue to voice concern over Japan's quote-unquote lurch to the right in efforts to expand its military. The United States doesn't feel that way and supports Japan's efforts to protect its territory. Now, personally, I agree with the United States with this. The end of the Second World War was years ago. Nearly 2 generations have passed, and Japan has every right to defend itself and its territory. Its current constitution needs to be changed. Japan has a self-defense force. It's the de facto military. If something looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, you call it a duck. And I've said this many times here on the podcast. Japan needs to be able to protect its interest. It's not going to invade, it's not going to attack unless it is attacked. China and South Korea need to recognize that Japan has a right as a sovereign nation to protect itself. And continuously condemning Japan for trying to protect its own interests both domestically and abroad does nothing to bring about stability or cohesiveness in the region. South Korea and China need to back away and fully respect Japan's sovereign rights. Does President Park Geun-hye want to improve relations with Japan? The Yomiuri Shimbun takes to task South Korean President Park Geun-hye on whether or not she truly wants to improve relations with Japan. Now, President Park has made several statements like the following: that Japan must show a correct understanding of history and take an attitude of responsibility before talks can begin. And that, my friends, is the wrong attitude to have. If you take a look at how the 6-party talks have been conducted with North Korea, currently there's a set of preconditions on North Korea that they say that we are no longer going to develop nuclear weapons before any kinds of discussions can begin. And what has happened? Well, there are no discussions. There is no progress. If President Park continues to have that same attitude with Japan, there is going to be no talks. There is going to be no improving of relations between the two countries. Now, this hardline stance is playing out very well here in Korea. It's a very popular stance. However, internationally, it hurts South Korea. It makes South Korea look petty, and since Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has come out and said that he is open to dialogue with President Park Geun-hye,
it puts Japan in a more positive light. It says that they are open to negotiations, they're open to discussions, they want to resolve the tension between the two nations. Unfortunately, South Korea does not appear as if it wants to. It looks like it really is trying to play a card to force Japan to admit things that either it doesn't agree to or that it's not ready to. And that's the wrong way. If you try to enter into dialogue with another country and you're going in it with really a sense of force, that you're trying to force another country to bow to your will, nothing ever good comes from it. If you look at the tension with North Korea and the problems with its nuclear program, the fact that Japan and South Korea will not share intelligence because of this infighting between them is just ludicrous. President Park Geun-hye needs to take the higher road. She needs to sit down with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and work things out. And finally, one last story. China pleads with the citizens to be good tourists. Now, I found this story to be quite humorous, so here we go. The National Tourism Administration publicized a 64-page guidebook for civilized tourism. Now, this was mainly designed to help improve the image of Chinese tourists as they travel abroad, mainly to Japan for the Golden Week holiday. Now, this book had illustrations, it had lists of do's, of don'ts, and these included don't pick your nose, don't pee in the pool, and there's one story of where one woman, her child had to go to the bathroom, so she whipped out a bottle and had him pee at the table. Don't sit for long periods of times on the toilet, and a whole lot more. Now, some in Hong Kong actually refer to tourists from the mainland as locusts. And it appears the government really wants to address this because China has so much money that Chinese tourism is being very much sought after here in East Asia. And they are worried that if a negative perception continues of Chinese tourism, their citizens won't be welcome. So I would love to get a hand on this book to actually see it for myself, because I think it is a hoot that the government would go so far as to publish rules for its citizens for in traveling abroad. Well, my friends, that is the news this week. I'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the podcast. This week's question of the week was asked by a few people, and really it's what I think of Japan. Now, a while back, I visited Tokyo for the YouTube gathering, and I have to say I had a great time there. So people were asking what I think about Japan. How does it compare to Korea? And I thought that was a good question because as I was traveling in Japan, that is what I was doing. I was seeing what is alike, what is not alike, which one does things better. So in this week's question of the week, I will address a few of those things. So what are my impressions of Tokyo? Because that's the city that I went. Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I thought it was pretty much the same as Seoul. It's a very large, spread out city with great transportation. However, I will say that I found Tokyo to be a cleaner city and to be more orderly. And that's one of the things that I think when visitors come to Seoul are really surprised about. Not to say that Seoul is a dirty city, but we say that here in Korea we have very much a bari-bari lifestyle. It's very quick, it's very fast. And that's very evident, especially with transportation in Seoul. You will often see cars and buses blow through red lights. And I found that in Japan that wasn't the case. Things were very much on an orderly schedule. If there was a red light, you stopped, you waited, and then you went through. Here in Korea, sometimes it just is like a suggestion. Oh, I need to go, so there you go. I also found it very welcoming that scooters and bikes were not on the sidewalks all the time, because I can't tell you how many times I've almost been run down by those little guys all over the city. So largely, I think it was the same. I think Tokyo was a much more relaxed environment. And coming from the West, I see why a lot of people enjoy Japan and enjoy Tokyo so much more than, say, like Seoul. because it has more of a Western feel to it. You can find larger sizes, you have more international brands, and it just has a more relaxed atmosphere. Coming from Phoenix, from New York, from Los Angeles, you have the same feel. Seoul is much more ramped up. It feels more like Manila or Jakarta in terms of density and the way that people travel. In terms of aesthetics, no real difference there. I pretty much thought both were the same. I really didn't find anything too different. I was surprised by the lack of English in some of the transportation hubs. Here in Korea, the transportation system is fantastic, and they do a really good job of listing everything out in English, Chinese, Japanese, and Hangul. But in Japan, typically the stops themselves are in multiple languages, but a few times when I was at select different subway stops, the big maps were only in Japanese, and I needed to have friends help me figure out where I need. Let me rephrase that. I knew where I needed to go, but I couldn't read on the map where that was, so I couldn't really determine how much the fare was for the subway. Now here in Korea, it's very easy to do that. The other thing I thought was very interesting was that in Japan, when you went on the subway, you used paper tickets, which just blew my mind because here in Korea, we got rid of those several years ago, and we use just a card to transfer and go. It saves on printing, it saves on paper, it saves on waste. It's just a much more efficient way of doing things. So to have Japan still use paper tickets, and I just think about all those stalls and all the mechanical problems that could arise when you jam tickets in there time and time again, the magnetic ink on the back of them. Then you have the printing cost, the paper cost. Just having a small card that's RFID, you already have those in place with the Suica cards. You wouldn't need to have that. It's just a better system that Korea has. I found both to be comparable in price. So yeah, I really enjoyed my time in Tokyo. There's a few nuances, but to be perfectly honest with you, I pretty much found them the same. I will only say that the only, difference I can really come up with is that I found Tokyo to be more relaxed. So that's it. So that was a great question. If you have a question for me, please shoot me a message, questions@QiRanger.com.
Are you tired of the 9-to-5 grind? Well, today's guest is going to tell you how you can effectively cut the cord and experience life as you like it. We're going to talk with Jeff on QiRanger RTW, Travel Talk Around the World. Just take me away. Like I said, today's guest is one I've been looking forward to talking to. His name is Jeff Young, and he is the man behind CareerBreakSecrets.com. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mr. Steve. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, Mr. Steve, I like that. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. We are. I'm just winding down the day here in Bogota. So, yeah, it's been a good day.
You're winding down the day. I'm starting it up. So before we get into the question and answer period, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. I started CareerBreakSecrets.com back in 2009. I had just come off my own career break where I'd been traveling around mostly South America, a little bit of Europe and Middle East, North Africa. And I was looking for something to do. I decided that I wanted to resettle back in the U.S. and become an expat. And I wanted to stay in travel. So I thought, well, write about what you know, which is taking a career break and how to leave your job and go travel. And so I started CareerBreakSecrets.com, and over the past 4 years now, we've been running the blog and involved in social media. And then last year, I launched a book, the Career Break Traveler's Handbook. And then this year, I launched a TV show in the U.S. on a new travel channel called the Venture Channel. And the title of my show is originally titled the Career Break Travel Show. So I'm busy managing all of those properties.
Wow, that's busy. So what exactly is a career break?
A career break essentially is a time in your life where you leave your job to go focus on a personal passion. And that can be, I advocate that you do that through travel. It doesn't have to be. It's generally at least a month, because a month is what you need to effectively disconnect from your old life, from your old job, and really have the chance to sort of settle into whatever it is that you're focused on. And that passion could be learning a new skill, like learning a new language, learning how to sail. It could be volunteering and having the chance to give back in a long-term or medium-term way, where it's not just going to a local charity once a week in your hometown and volunteering for an hour or an afternoon. You can actually spend a week or 3 weeks or a month or longer with an organization, really have a chance to own a project and really give some value back. It could also be just a cool way to see a country. So, being able to bike across a region or a country, being able to do a hike that you've always wanted to do, whatever that is. But with that month or 3 months or 6 months that you have time off, you can really just let yourself go, dig into the experience, and have some travel experiences that are more difficult to have on a 1 week's vacation time frame.
I like how you're explaining this, because you start off saying, well, a couple weeks, a month, 3 months, 6 months, or longer. It's like keeps on getting longer. And, one of the things that break kind of envisions is that you are going to return to something. So are you just severing your job, or is it something that you're really taking a break from and you intend to come back to at a later time?
One thing that's important to realize is 70%, there was a study done back in 2008, 2009, 70% of people who take a career break or a sabbatical go back to their career, the same career they had beforehand. So they're not like people like me who had a career and then went traveling and then decided to do something else. Most people, they literally just want a break, and they have a career to leave and come back to. It would be nice if I could say that most employers would let you come back to your, the same job in the same company. Unfortunately, that's not the case today. But having said that, if you leave your job in the right way, you don't burn any bridges, and you have a really well thought out plan when you leave, employers tend to respect that on some level. So when you come back, if you're still interested in that same employer or the same career, oftentimes they would be willing to listen to you and have you come back, because to bring you back on board, even if you've been away for 3 months, is a heck of a lot cheaper and a heck of a lot more efficient than bringing in somebody completely new. Even if you have a different job when you get back to that company.
Right, because you're already familiar with the corporate structure, the corporate identity, and you can just fill in your new role without really having to adjust to the global things within that company again. And it really sounds like the way that you advocate doing this is a lot more organized than, say, what, at least when I was growing up, and what my mother would probably call it, is having a midlife crisis and just cutting loose and going out.
Running away is I mean, it's never a good idea, because you invariably take all those problems with you, and to a certain degree, a career break is an escape. There's no doubt about it. But if you've got serious issues that you need to work out on your professional or personal life, you're going to take those with you. Now, that's not to say you can't use a bit of travel to help be part of your whatever therapy it is you need to go through. But I advocate that you have a goal or two, or an objective, whatever word you want to use, of things you want to accomplish while you're out traveling, whether it is a month or whether it's a year. Because and basically all you need to ask yourself is, okay, when I'm done traveling, what is it that that I want to be able to say that I accomplished? You're going to see all the touristy things that you want to see. You're going to try different foods, but what is it that you really want to spend your time doing? And that's a really great way, in a simple question, just to sort of focus your planning and focus where you go and what you spend your time doing.
So speaking of planning, what kinds of things should you be looking at and trying to think through and plan before you decide, hey, this is what I need to do to fulfill my core being. I need to accomplish these tasks. What do you have to kind of plan to start a career break?
Well, the first question everybody asks and wants to know about is, can I afford this and how much does it cost? And so what I recommend is a 3-part budget to help you figure out how much money you actually need. The first part of the budget is sort of your before you go budget. So it's that time and that money that you need from the time that you leave your job and you don't have an income coming in anymore until you get on a plane and go. And that part of the budget is going to be roughly what your current budget is, what you're currently spending your money on. You may be able to downsize that a little bit, but it's basically what you're going to spend now. The cheapest part of your budget is actually going to be your on the road budget. So the time you get on the plane to the time you come back. And so when you hear people say, oh, I traveled for $40 a day or $60 a day or $50 a day, that's what they're talking about. What you'll find is that there are all kinds of ways to economize on lodging, on food, on transportation, so you can meet that $50 or $55 or $45 a day type of budget. Mm-hmm. And then finally, you need a re-entry budget. So that's the period of time when you get back from your trip and you're looking for a job, and how much time you need, to re-enter and get that first job and start earning an income again.
So since we're talking about money, and money is what makes the world go round, are there any, I guess, pitfalls that people need to be thinking about so they can avoid those while planning and executing their career break?
I think the biggest thing is people underestimate what they spend at home in their current lifestyle, and they overestimate how much they're going to need while they're traveling. So what I recommend is information is power, right?
Right.
What I recommend is take your current budget and think about all the money that you're spending today to maintain your lifestyle, your housing or your apartment payment, your food, your transportation, add it all up and divide it by 30 to get to sort of a per day rate of how much you're spending today in your current lifestyle.
Okay.
And I think that number is going to be a lot higher than what people would expect. Then when you are out planning your trip, you're going to, because you've now made a list of what you're spending all the money on, you're going to start to see when you're out traveling on the road, you're not going to have the cable bill, and you're not going to have the cell phone bill, and you're not going to have the, whatever the gym membership, and you're not going to have, you may or may not have even your apartment payment or your housing payment, depending on what you decide to do with that while you're gone. So all of a sudden you start to see all these expenses just immediately disappear. And then on top of that, if you figure you're not going to be staying at a 5-star, 4-star hotel every night, you're going to be looking for more economic options. All of a sudden the budget starts to come down while you're on the road. And I think that is a huge surprise to people. And for some people, it even becomes a game. Like, okay, how little can I actually spend while I'm on the road?
Yeah, my wife and I play that game all the time.
I try to play the game. I don't know that I always win though.
But it's fun to be able to find things like when I travel for my work a lot of times as well. And one of the things I always try to do is find similar items in different countries to compare and contrast price, because it's something that just fascinates me. And if you're not working, trying to do that and cut costs is the ideal way to make your money last longer, so you can travel more and just have a better sense of self and life.
Yeah, and I think I'm talking to a lot of career breakers. I know this happened to me as well. The longer I was on the road, the better I got at budgeting, and the better, because when it came down to like, okay, should I stay at this hostel or that hostel or hotel even? And I would go, okay, well, there's a difference of, say, I'm making it up, let's say there's a difference of, say, $20 or $30, maybe $40. I would then all of a sudden start to think, well, $40 I could spend on this and I could spend on that, and that could get me a little extra, a mini luxury item at, during, or this extra excursion, or, and all of a sudden I started thinking about how I could take money away from what I was spending on the bed at night versus the travel experiences that I really wanted to have while I was out and about around the world.
Oh no, I totally understand that, and my wife and I do that all the time. It's like, our goal is to go to this location, and we're planning to be gone all day long. So do we really want to spend extra money on a fancier, quote unquote, fancier accommodation that we're basically going to be sleeping in? And that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, for me, I never stayed in a hostel until I went on my career break when I was 37.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what kind of warped image I had of hostels. But I stayed in some really nice hostels, for $10 a night, $15 a night, maybe splurging and spending $20 a night. Some really nice places. I couldn't believe it. I was really stunned.
Oh, yeah.
Really stunned what you could get.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different options. My wife and I use guest houses and hostels frequently here in Korea because we found them to be very hospitable, great value for your money, and just genuinely nice places to stay.
Yeah, really nice. And always with a story, more of a story than a generic hotel.
Yeah. So we're starting to run out of time, but I wanted to ask you if since you do manage these different these properties about career break, has anyone ever shared with you, some kind of life-altering story that you could share with us?
Oh, there are a lot, actually.
Okay.
One of the ones that I have actually on my website, so you can actually go and see her. It's a woman by the name of Caroline Boudreau. Caroline is from Austin, Texas. She was in corporate sales for a television station, actually, and was completely burnt out. And one day, her and her best friend, they'd had a particularly rough week, particularly bad day, and they went to the bar after work to actually, talk about what was going on. They kind of looked at each other to say, let's go travel the world. I'm done with this, and I really need a break. I really need to get out of here. And they planned a, kind of a whimsical trip where they were going to be traveling around the world, scuba diving, basically.
Ooh.
And they hit India, and the best friend had been sponsoring a child in India, so they wanted to go meet the child for the first time and do a little bit of volunteer work. And the conditions in this village were really, really poor. And the conditions at the orphanage were really, really poor. And it just hit Caroline really strongly. And she decided that it just inspired her to want to make a change for these children. And she quit the career break early, went back to Austin, and started planning basically an orphanage. And now she started a foundation called the Miracle Foundation, run out of Austin. They now run about 8 to 10 orphanages around India.
Wow.
They have very high standards for how they treat the kids, the education they get, the clothing, the food, the medical care, etc. And she's been doing it now long enough that the first kids are graduating and actually going on to university.
Wow.
And these are all sort of from the untouchable classes, and they're going on to study. I don't know what, but yeah, they're going on to study university, and without Caroline's help and the foundation's help and their volunteers and how they manage it, these kids would have been forgotten. And that's an example of one person that I know, and I hear a lot of these stories. They're not all as dramatic as Caroline's. They all impact people in different ways, but people do come back from these trips with a fresh perspective on life, with a ton of their batteries are recharged and a new sense of self-confidence, ready for the next stage, whatever that is.
Oh, cool. Well, we are just about out of time, so thank you so much for joining us this week on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And before we go, where can people find you on the interwebs?
Sure. They can find me on QiRangerPodcast.com, which is where the blog, home to the blog, and information about the TV show is. We're also on Facebook at Facebook/QiRangerPodcast, and we're on Twitter, but probably the easiest place to find us is go to the website or go to Facebook and link over to Twitter, because our Twitter handle is a little wonky. So.
Okay. Well, thankfully, I will put all that information in the show notes. So you just head over to QiRanger.com. You can click on any of the links, and it'll take you to all the places. So, Jeff, again, thank you for joining me this week on the podcast.
Just take me
my friends, that will just about do it for this week's episode of the QiRanger Podcast. Thank you again for joining me. I hope you had a great time. Now, to keep up with all that I do, including the show notes for this week's episode, be sure to surf on over to QiRanger.com. News and travel videos come out at 5 a.m. on the QiRanger channel, while my daily vlogs debut at around 4 p.m. over on the vlog channel. If you want to keep up with me as I experience life, be sure to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you have any feedback about the podcast, please shoot me a message. You can do so at podcast@QiRanger.com. But until next time, remember to be true to yourself and always be awesome. The QiRanger Podcast is written and produced by Steve Miller and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license. Morning Blue was written and produced by Josh Woodward.